Perhaps I should start with the necessary noise. Here it is. This morning's Dharma talk is titled. Before I give you a title, I'd like to say, you can ask questions. Give me a few minutes to talk about it, but I'm all about questions. You will help, we will help. We do this mutually to go down to this material. So if I don't get many responses, or it just makes it harder for me. So help me out here. So the title of the Dharma talk is something that comes up all the time, all over the place, in the form of Sanskrit words like Tathagata Garbha, Dharmata, Dharmadhatu. The title of the talk is Buddha Nature, the nature of awakening. And this is it's a concept, but it is so much more than just a concept. It is something that we all can realize. Until we realize it, it seems to be necessary to do a lot of very relative situation practice, train our mind, see what's moving, see what's coming and going, without adding, subtracting, or dividing. It's difficult because the self-centered mind, the ego mind, wants something else. The very nature of human beings, according to the Buddha, which is what this lineage is about, these teachings of Buddha, awakened truth, Buddha Dharma, is to see what is true. And he helped us out a little bit. He gave us some concepts. Everything is dependently risen. There's no solid, separate being or person or object anywhere. And that's the relative way of describing it. The ultimate way of describing it can't be described. So we come as close as we can. So we say Buddha nature, awakened nature. And understanding or realizing, or when Buddha nature shows up, it will not be an experience contrasted to the way you were. If it actually does show up, which is just a relative way of saying something that doesn't show up. Something is already the case, doesn't need to show up. But we go at this with the various kinds of techniques or processes, and that's why there's so many different schools, and that's why the Buddha, before his parinirvana, before he passed away, and whatever happened, he left his students kind of not too sure what to do. He said, you should get rid of some of those, 250 precepts, but not all of them, keep a few. But he didn't tell them which ones, according to the tradition. And he was so vague, after being so specific for, 40 years or more, at the end he was so vague that some people kind of misunderstand what that was about. That was deliberate. He wanted there to be 18 different schools shooting out after 100 years or so. Just guesswork on my part. But because he did that, those are called seeds. He didn't come up with a specific Buddha nature that everybody has to do it this way. No, he basically said, I'm leaving, work it out, left, died. Work out your salvation with diligence. Find out who you are. He didn't say, worship the Buddha. Although a person may have to take on that kind of an approach to even connect with the whole thing. And sometimes in the Tibetan tradition, this is called the guru, or the Satguru, or true teacher. That works to some extent, and in other ways it's irritating. So it's taught in a very relative way, so we can get our ego mind can actually enter into, you can't enter into this particularly without the structure of ego and without looking at the structure of ego. Passion, aggression, ignorance, the 12 links in the chain of existence, which you could study, which we study, all of that material here every day. So it's not, there's different ways of pointing at this. One of the ways that I can point to it and that others have, not that I'm certainly not the first, but nothing happens. You don't become someone else. You just stop lying to yourself. Does that mean you stop lying? No, you just stop lying to yourself. You should ask questions if you don't understand. Buddha nature is not something that you can show up, that you can suddenly remember how you didn't have Buddha nature. So there's no memory of being self-centered, egotistical, and being whatever, murderer, liar, thief, cheating people. There's no memory of it. Not that you don't have a memory of it, but it's not a memory that you have. You should ask questions if you don't understand. Go ahead.
You often say that you haven't gotten rid of everything and you couldn't teach if that wasn't the case.
I couldn't teach if I was somebody other than who I was when I was born, and neither can you. If you think you can, then you'll promote yourself on some level, thinking you have something other people don't have. The Buddha couldn't teach. When the Buddha awoke, we were all there. We're all there. You're not separate from that. Wake up to it by seeing how asleep you are. Go ahead. I didn't answer your question, so I'll paraphrase it.
You often say you have to teach out of the same situations that we're going through.
I
more or
teach
less.
out of what I'm looking at. I don't plan anything other than somebody, that person right there, asks me what is your Dharma talk title? And then I ask Unyo, what should I talk about?
No.
And then she says, I don't know. She says, don't you have a list somewhere? So it just shows up somehow. I don't know how that happens. It's not particularly weird or magical. It just shows up. Show up.
What is the difference between lying to yourself and lying?
Same thing.
How do you not lie to yourself, but lie?
See that they're the same thing. The ego mind is always looking for something else. It separates. The very nature of confusion is separation. And when I say don't do it, I know you can't help but do it. I can't help do it. I can't help but lie to myself. Pardon the throat clearing. Sokuzan.
Is there an active component to Buddha nature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does it differ from
Here it comes. Go ahead.
the ego that makes decisions and
Same thing. Same thing. Buddha nature is happening here. It's not just, I'm just doing this because this is my function. You're doing that because that's your function. Go ahead. Is that a question? Whose head is shaking? Yes?
So if we can't help but lie to ourselves, what is awakening?
Seeing that you lie. Seeing relative truth for what it is. It's relative truth. And if you see deeply into that, it will begin to empty out. And then it's called emptiness or shunyata. And then if you continue to look at that, if you conclude something like, I must be awake, I see emptiness. I see that everything is meaningless or empty or doesn't have a point or doesn't have a handle, doesn't have a flag, doesn't have a tenant or a tennis court. Go ahead.
So how could someone who truly sees emptiness relate to the concept of emptiness?
Your relationship is done. Relationship is over with. I mean, I'm not saying things don't come and go and we don't, if you walk down the hallway and you need to go to the kitchen to get some tea or something, the relationships are very temporary. So they just show up and vanish. So they look like relationships as long as there's something that needs to be done. Most people who are not clear about this because they have not trained their mind, even when everything stops, they continue to rotate. This is what sitting on the cushions, what wall gazing is about. Sit down, hold still, and notice that something else keeps going. After this, not want that, I like this, I don't like that, that's good, this shouldn't be happening, why am I feeling this way? Why don't I ever get this or get that? I don't deserve this. Or that person shouldn't have said that. Or I shouldn't have said that to that person. I need to clean up my act. Or I need to figure this out. That's very good. Please keep coming.
So do we produce those ruminations?
Do we produce them? They're produced. It looks like we're producing them. Because it looks like there's somebody who is the producer and somebody who's the receiver. It's just any kind of grasping immediately separates and isolates everything from everything else, and then we come up with concepts about it. The first words out of the Buddha's mouth, as far as we know, is life is suffering. We immediately start to argue with that, rather than look at it. Is it? Is life suffering? People will say who are lost in their thought patterns and their process in their mind, they will say, well, that's nihilistic. Of course life isn't suffering. Sometimes we have a lot of fun. Sometimes there's parties. Sometimes there's pleasure. So it's separating, it's more separation. Sometimes it's actually suffering all the time, until you see that the nature of time doesn't actually contribute too much to that. Keep coming. I need your help.
I don't know where else to go.
I like that. Is that a question?
Where else can I go?
Yeah, exactly. You just answered. Yes, sir.
What contributes to suffering?
A desire, the wish for something else. We want things to be different than they are. Things are a certain way. For everyone here, they're a certain way, and you'll notice how you don't exactly like that. You don't exactly, maybe you don't dislike it, but there's something off. Something, you need something else or something more. So that may function to confuse you, to take you in circles, but if you're a practitioner, if you're spending some time unplugging the basic apparatus of self-centeredness or ego, the discursive mind that keeps spinning in circles and looking for something else, something else, something else, something better, something bigger, something smaller. Please excuse the leaking sinuses. Three at once. Sato.
How do you keep striving towards realization or Buddha nature, whatever, without grasping those concepts?
Okay, good. So this is important. All you have to do is watch that you grasp it. But the ego mind, the self-centered mind, the seventh consciousness, one that's full of self-reference and pride and everything else that seems to be hidden, as soon as it sees anything functioning, instead of just having a little bit of generosity there, in other words, give it your attention. You don't have to do anything with it. If you try to clean up your act, then it provides you with that particular ego structure or klesha mind with some kind of someone who's doing that. Someone who's trying to get somewhere. It's called spiritual materialism, by taking what you see and trying to move it into something better. Trying to get rid of that. It's not about getting rid of anything. It's just about fun. This is why the Buddha taught the way he taught. He saw what this was, and he saw that it was painful and difficult for people. And he said, life is suffering. The cause is desire. The goal is cessation, and the path is train your mind. Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Discipline, meditation, wisdom. And then there's a bunch of other ones that I generally don't use because I don't like numbers. Yes?
From Ethan in New York City.
Ethan.
He asks, you have the memory, but you don't have it. What does that mean? Thanks.
Doesn't belong to anyone. So there's no ownership, there's no someone who's remembering. If that's, I'm not sure if that's what you're asking. Was he making a statement? Ethan, were you making a statement about yourself? Or asking me a question? Or was this preparing for your comedy act? He's a comedian, so I can say that. I thought he was in Boston. Yes, choo-choo.
A question from Raphael in New York.
Yes.
In Buddhist literature or Zen stories, there does seem to be a something that happens that causes a profound sense of well-being, peace, and insight. We don't hear too many stories of Buddhist masters or the Buddha becoming upset because someone spat at them. Do you think enlightenment stories and their promise of peace and happiness is why people judge their zazen as being off?
Could be. I don't promise anything. I might go the other way. You might have to suffer forever. I'm not going to interfere with the karma that you need to look at in order to awaken, in order to see clearly what this is. So I don't promise anything. I'm sometimes amazed that somebody even stays here. isn't any promises. A lot of that, those things about being at peace and being happy and being, and all that, that's, I'm not saying you couldn't say that in some ways, and a lot of teachers do talk about it in that way, but I think that's disrespectful to people's, it separates it out into the before and after. I don't have any memory of being enlightened or being crazy. I don't have any memory of it. I teach out of what this is. I don't teach out of as somebody who knows something you don't. More about that? You want to read that again, just in case I missed something?
In Buddhist literature or Zen stories, there does seem to be a something that happens that causes a profound sense of well-being, peace, and insight. We don't hear too many stories of Buddhist masters or the Buddha becoming upset because someone spat at them. Do you
I'm ready to respond. Okay, so there are lots of stories out there. The ones I tend to like, and I can't always remember who said it, but somebody, I think in the 17th century, a teacher said, well, now that I'm finally enlightened, I'm just as miserable as ever. I like that story. It's not different. Separating confusion from awakening, separating sanity from insanity, and separating delusion from Buddha nature, or samsara from nirvana, is a misunderstanding. It's not that you couldn't separate that some if you were, depending on how you met someone, you might emphasize that. With some people, you really need to emphasize that because they're in a God realm where they think nothing is wrong, everything is fine. Why should I meditate? I feel great. And of course, what would I say? If they looked like they wanted me to say something, I might say something else. But I also might just shut up and respect their confusion. Not by saying you're confused, by saying, very good, I hope everything goes well for you, good luck, or something. Not being sarcastic. I don't want to interfere with someone's confusion, even though it might look like confusion to me. On a relative scale, ultimately it looks like Buddha nature. I don't see anybody but the Buddha. This is not a bragging point for me. Come and step on my foot and see if I don't hit you. So it's not about cleaning up your act, it's about being genuine. And you need to be genuine with this karma. Don't miss your life. Don't try to be a special person. Try to find out who you actually are, not separate from your karma. This doesn't mean you can go off and abuse people because I said so. I'm not saying that. Good question. Go ahead.
Me?
Tim?
Tim, yeah. I'd like to take a practical approach. So, acting in my day-to-day life out of a Buddha nature versus acting out of an ego-based center. Now, we know meditation is the first step towards acting more out of a Buddha nature.
No, we don't.
We don't know that?
No. Do you want to teach?
My question is, what action steps do I take
Got it.
to act more out of a Buddha nature than out of an ego nature?
Meditate.
Meditate is okay.
No, you were correct. I jumped in there thinking you were going in a different direction. But
Okay, so meditation is the first step.
yeah, probably the first step is from the way it looks here, because it wouldn't happen. I didn't know. I was trying to meditate before I met my teacher, but so I'm kind of biased. I think you need to find a teacher.
Oh, okay.
You need to find somebody that you can maybe not trust, but at least give the benefit of the doubt to. If you can't give them the benefit of the doubt, then at least listen. Consider what's being said. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't give the benefit of the doubt to your own paranoia too. I wouldn't step into someplace that's a cult. If they make any demands on you, then it is cult-like. I'm not saying it's a cult, but if there's some kind of strong requirement, your karma may take you into that, and that may be the only thing you can do is follow Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who, by the way, was probably an enlightened master. That is, he had lots of students, and they tended to get things kind of screwed up. Question here, Michael?
What is the necessity of giving the teacher
What?
the ability to, I lost the word.
Good. Progress.
Why is that why do you consider that interaction progress?
It was funny. It was a joke.
Okay.
No, not competing with Ethan. Stand up. No, give me the question. I kind of say, why, is it about a teacher or? what?
It's about the ability to be open with the teacher. Why is that part of the
So, okay, go ahead.
part of the relationship that you say it all the time? And
I do, what do I say?
That's the part I can't get, is
Ah.
repeat you right at this moment.
So, well, let's go to another question then. Anyone else? Junchu?
Question from Shane in California.
Yes, Shane?
What is left over in a mind that is absent delusion?
It depends on if the person, this is a person who's living a human life. So it could be delusion, could be all kinds of things, could be almost anything. What is missing is the grasping, the fixation. One actually is able to live one's karma. I sometimes say if you meditate from now on forever, you're not going to change the shape of your ears. You're not going to get rid of the karma that brought you into this sphere. So stop fighting with yourself. I just gave a talk recently that said, don't improve. And the talk was kind of feeble. I blame you guys for that. You need to ask me questions about it, please. Drag it out of me. Yes?
Does grasping and fixation change?
What those concepts refer to is brought into a really brilliant light. So your karma, you'll see it, but you may be able to stop the fixation. You might just have to witness it from now on. I don't know what karma I know how many lifetimes brought you to this mandala. So there's no specificity around individual. I would just say, just be genuine, just be who you are, and combine it with a strong awareness practice. So you sit down, hold still, and you sharpen that aspect, to put it very relatively, that aspect of your mind that just observes. This can be really challenging. You don't want to find yourself with a pistol in your hand standing in front of a counter holding somebody up for money. That's the kind of thing we're afraid of. Of course we're not going to do that. I say of course, maybe, but I doubt it. But the negativity that begins to arise, we start to protect ourselves. In ancient times it was called discipline, morality, and all kinds of things. There was so much control going on. You don't need to do that. Now, I'm not saying you don't need strong forms, but they need to show up in a relative way in this relative culture, in combination of who knows how many different things are coming together to produce. What is unusual culture? This has never been like this before, where you can talk to somebody, you can go and get on the WhatsApp and talk to somebody in Europe right away, immediately. Go ahead.
Shane has another question.
Better be a good one.
How is it that you are so good at not interfering with people's karma?
Is that a compliment? Because I would say, to give you a because, it's just I see that's the only way. I can't stop being who I am. And that kind of situation is just everything is tumbling around all the time. There's just nobody in there to be tumbled. So the tumbling continues. The motions of passion, aggression, ignorance, grasping, fixation, everything may still, because you're not interfering with what's the fancy word is pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination, the dependently arisen character of everything. Some parts of it are like leaves, some parts of it are like ants, some parts of it are like human beings, some parts are mountains. We name these things and we separate everything out, and then we add more thoughts on what we're going to do with it. Is it our garden? Is it our deer that we just shot? Are these our clouds in the sky? That's why I sometimes use the metaphor of looking at the clouds in the sky and seeing they're none of your business. They're interesting, they're magnetizing, sometimes they're frightening, depending on the weather. But just treat your own thoughts the same way. Weather. So things may come and may go, but there's no solid being. If you see there is no self in the skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness, and there's no other out there, you begin to see there's no other person, even though there's solid beings everywhere who think they're somebody.
There's a question from Laura in Traverse City.
Okay,
How does one cut desire while off the cushion?
just observe. If there's someone cutting it, that's spiritual materialism. And that's trying to be somebody else, trying to get somewhere, trying to be less that way. You need to watch I'm not saying you can't be less materialistic or less grasping or less fixated, but the way that is going to show up, if it does show up at all, is by looking at the identity of someone who's doing that. Because that's the primary delusion, the primary misunderstanding, the primary ignorance is thinking there is someone. This is the first, the 12 links on the chain of existence is ignorance. Ignorance forms. So we have ignorance and then formations or samskaras begin to happen. So just look at the self-centeredness. You sit down and you watch what's happening. As soon as you see what's happening, as soon as you stop adding, subtracting, and dividing, it'll start to open up and be empty. A little bit different for everyone. And then you can see me. Is there someone there? You know that witnessing is easy. It's happening all the time. But is there a witness? Is there someone? So just observe. Ed,
How do you live your karma?
stop arguing with yourself.
Pardon me?
Stop arguing with yourself about things, or agree. Don't argue. Don't disagree. Don't agree. Don't look away. And that's pretty challenging. That's a lifetime practice. Go ahead.
So living with your karma is witnessing or observing your karma? Is that a correct statement?
Until there's no observer. Yes.
And I didn't hear your last.
Until there's no observer. You
Until
observe
there's
because
no observer.
there's an imputation that I'm looking at the sunlight coming through the window and hitting the bench and hitting Shoto's notebook. There's somebody looking at that, isn't there? Just because there's a body here, body-mind complex, 6 sense fields and their objects, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. There's all kinds of reification coming from relative truth. But who you are ultimately, you could, if any one of us were to die, if I were to die right this moment, nothing would happen, something would happen to you, but nothing would happen to me. Nothing would happen to you either unless your mind was tied up in knots. Then you would totally ignore that you just died. That you just went back into that, because who you actually are is Buddha nature. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't arise. It doesn't fall away. If you continue to ignore it, then you'll continue to spin. Don't do it. See what this is. Sit down, hold still, spend some time. Don't do it for me. Do it for your ancestors. Do it for the Buddha. Do it for Nagarjuna. Do it for Dharmakirti. Do it for Sekito Kisen, or whatever they called him. Did I get his name right? I mean, actually you can find, this is what the Bodhisattva path is about, is even though we're working on ourselves, we're working on ourselves, we find out we can't do this, that's the Hinayana path. We can't really do this because we're ignoring the fundamental nature of this, which is not separate. We keep thinking we're a special person who's going to attain enlightenment and everybody else is on their own. Until you become a Mahayanist, and then you realize that you aren't separate from anybody. You can't attain enlightenment unless everybody wakes up. You have to see that everybody's awake. With the Buddha's awakening, I wasn't there, but if I was there, so were you. What the Buddha saw is everywhere he looked, he saw the awakening. I understood this in 1977. I was in a solitary retreat. I woke, sat up, looked around, and saw. I saw it, and then the concept came. And here's the concept, which is much separate from what I saw. Nothing sleeps. Nothing has ever slept. But it's taken 40 plus years to be able to understand deeply what that is. Do you like sunlight?
On occasion.
I thought maybe you're protecting you because of the light radiating out of my ears.
I can't talk when the light's shining me in the eye for some reason. I don't know. I guess I can after all.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Ed.
We use the word relative. Relative to what?
Each other.
No.
No. Oh, no.
Something. Well, let's ask this question.
That's a good idea.
I'm observing, and something arises. Okay, where does it arise from? Is there a source?
That's none of your business. It's really not. I don't know how else to say it more directly. It's none of your business. Just look at the arising, And then that's, just observe, and then you will get information, you could call it information about how to proceed. So there's no observer, but that is imputed. You have an imputation, or the imaginary nature, there's somebody, if there's pain, there must be somebody feeling the pain. If there's hearing, must be somebody hearing. Must be, because we see something else out there and we're receiving a cardinal in the trees. Oh, it's a cardinal. And we just, that immediately gives us a three-dimensional world in time and space, which is an illusion. Sokuzan.
How can we relate to grasping and fixation on cessation of suffering?
So it's taught different ways. The way I talk about it is the suffering itself doesn't cease particularly, but we need to talk about it, or it's been taught down through the centuries, including the Buddha, is it doesn't, what ceases is that there's someone suffering. There's there are nerve endings. So you're going to have pain, but suffering is extra, is fighting with the natural hierarchy of everything. You have nerve endings, you're going to feel, it might feel nice if a feather goes over your hand, and it might feel a railroad spike goes over your hand. It's going to, same nerve endings. So bring your question closer based on that.
If I see myself grasping and fixated on awakening, what do I do?
Just proceed, just continue. It's like if you say that, I'm just saying you're not, that's called the path. There's the threefold logic: ground, suffering, the path, training the mind, and fruition, seeing what is true. And even though it works as a ground, the beginning, the middle, and the end, fundamentally those all aren't separate. Once you realize what this is, there is no ground, there is no path, there's no realization. The sutras say it all the time. The Diamond Sutra says it over and over, kind of rubs it right in your face. And then the Heart Sutra just creates a rug and then yanks it. And that's what the teacher does.
Question from Bhaskar in Texas.
Oscar, this is going to be a hard one.
How is an enlightened bodhisattva helping others different from one who is not enlightened helping others? Aren't they both acting from duality?
Yes. Was that his question? Yes, they are. So what is different? Is there some difference? I don't know, find out. That's for you, Bhaskar. Find out. You can turn that around and come back with another question. It's a very difficult question to approach in a thorough way. So I have to wait for you to refine that, because you asked me the question and then you gave me isn't that just this? So, okay, it'll be that. Ask me an open-ended question where I need to say something. Yes?
What sees fixation?
Again, we're tied up with relative truth, we're tied up with language and concepts and so on, so the witnessing itself, the open dimension in which fixation is, you could say, witnessed, then that sees it, but there's no identity, there's no solid being there. There's no person who sees it, so just the openness sees it. You could say Buddha nature sees it. If you need a concept. More? Yes.
William Murray has a kind of a follow-up question. With no person in the skandhas, what is the belief that we are a person?
So the skandhas are form, feeling, perception, concept of the thinking process. I like it, I don't like it, it's good, it's bad, it shouldn't be, it should be. And consciousness of the six sense fields and their objects that come back through and hit the body, or reaffirm there's someone here that is hearing, someone here that is feeling, smelling, tasting. And what was the question?
With no person in the skandhas, what is the belief that we are a person?
It's just that. We see that happens and this happens, and then we assume there's some kind of space between things that are coming and going. You can't just have that without nothing there. And that is propelled by hope and fear. Hope that things will get better, fear they're going to get worse. and grasping, passion, rejecting aggression, and shutting down, ignoring, turning away, distracting ourselves, which is ignorance. So there's no solid being. Another way of talking about it is those 5 skandhas, traditional teaching that goes way back to the Buddha and before, that those get together. It's like 3 little beings. They're all holding on to hands. That by themselves, if you look at it, it's even taught this way. If you just look at form, there's no one there. If you just look at feeling, there's no actual feeler there. There's a perception, there's no actual perceiver there. And there's no conceptualizer there. And then the consciousness is without the 6th sense feels all this operating all at once. If you begin to see the separations in there, then we see that the coming together, the grasping that comes together between form, feeling, perception, concept, or consciousness makes up a being. It is said traditionally that when the 5 skandhas enter the 6 realms of the human realm, the jealous God realm, the God realm, the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the hell realm, this is called a living being. So if you see what those are, you don't come back here. I'm not saying you might not go somewhere. Maybe you go to a completely pure land. Maybe you go into hell to save beings. If you receive the Bodhisattva vow, you might spend the rest of, what do they call that? Eternity, yeah. The one with the clock with no hands. In hell, saving sentient beings who are at war with each other. This is actually a human realm because there's curiosity, but this could turn into a hell realm immediately. You all have been at a kitchen table where suddenly everything was just fine turns into hell, or maybe you haven't. Maybe it was in your garage or in your yard or over your neighbor's fence. Yes?
Question from Gary in Traverse City.
Yes, Gary?
If being genuine and encompassing our Buddha nature is our natural state, why then is it so difficult to see?
Because of the conditioning, because of karma, causes and conditions. For instance, the way you were raised, the way you were treated, but not limited to that, because your consciousness isn't limited to just this particular manifestation of this body. And I'm not promoting this at all. This is not something you believe in. I certainly don't believe it. But something is happening before this lifetime happened for each one of us. You may not be able to remember it, but you don't remember what happened last Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, or do you? Because if you do, I want to hear about it, because I don't remember anything. Yeah, well, there's a couple things I remember. Yes?
Is the human realm the only realm where we can see where we are?
Because there's curiosity there, and the heaven realm is so proud of itself, because it's just, has the example I often use is someone who's very successful, who has a perfect golf game, who has 2 children with perfect SAT scores, has a Harley on one side of the garage, and a couple of Mercedes and Alfa Romeo, or maybe they have a helicopter, and their marriage is perfect. Can't understand why someone else has so much difficulty with their. Everything's good. Why would I meditate? I would say, don't meditate.
Bhaskar says,
I knew that was coming.
I don't know how to ask my question without it being a why question.
That's okay.
His question is, why does an enlightened person need to help others?
So, just put it very conventionally and very graphically, the enlightened person doesn't see anyone else. But what the enlightened person sees very graphically is people who don't realize who they are. They don't realize their Buddha nature. So they're spinning. And if they spin over towards you and they say, can you help me? Then you would say, perhaps. What do you need? I'm suffering, I'm miserable, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that. And then you would check and see if you were able to meet that person in their confusion. See if you had permission. No propaganda. This would mean you wouldn't, if the person asks you, what do? You might say, I meditate. You also might not. Just a moment, please. You could say any number of things depending on who you were meeting. But you wouldn't see, you would see the suffering, but you would say it's unnecessary. that people are missing their life, not even enjoying that aspect of their life that might be not so bad, because they're so busy fighting, trying to get something else, something else, something else. This is what the sitting practice of meditation is sometimes called voluntary suffering. You're not only suffering your default suffering that is going on in your life, but also you in a meditation environment or in a monastery like this is, which is meant for this, so you can volunteer to come in and sit down, hold still, and watch the confusion, so that you can get more and more clear. It has a progressive way of showing up, but it's different with each person. And then you eventually, you'll eventually begin, because you're looking at it, you're not adding to it. Don't do the math, just have them, whatever's showing up is showing up is showing up. If it's coming towards you, it doesn't mean that you're guilty, you've got it coming, but it means that it's something for you to look at, and you should look. And so, but you don't interfere with someone, even though someone is suffering, you don't interfere without their permission, don't get in the way of someone's karma. But if they turn to you and they're suffering, then of course you, through the vow, I vow to be with all things, I vow to save all beings. But that doesn't mean you turn into some kind of a, someone who just does good because they like the feeling of being a good, helping person. This is a misunderstanding, and it's a very subtle form of pride and self-centeredness. And if you go in that direction, you'll kind of make a nest there, because then people will tell you how helpful you are. They actually get in the way of your awakening by complimenting you. If someone is awake, you can't compliment them. I'm not saying you can't, but they won't see much. And it's the same thing when you criticize them. They'll see it, and they may even consider what you're saying, but there's nothing particular happening as far as someone who is feeling picked on. They're more likely to see your confusion, because quite often, anytime you do anything, unless you understand who this is, you're just displaying your own neurosis. That's why it seems to be necessary to have a teacher. I certainly needed one. Still need one. And I have one. Where's my teacher at? Right here. Everywhere I look. Don't get too puffed up. Oh, there's a lot of hands. Let's all clap. No. Who's first? Go ahead, Michael.
What is the importance of giving the teacher the benefit of the doubt?
Because if you want to be a student, then that might be a good thing to do. But if you can't do that, then, but don't do anything unless you have to. I'm not here to try to get anybody to do this particularly.
What is the function of that?
Then you're basically saying is, I think I might want to learn something. I want to understand. Looks like you might understand something or know something that I don't quite understand. So, yeah, that kind of thing. So you're just, and you might actually ask, can I be a student of yours? You might just start functioning as a student. My first teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, I never did ask him. I was so overwhelmed and so terrified of him, because I felt like, when I saw him, I felt like he was looking through me, or looking at all my garbage that I had been unsuccessful at dealing with. And then, of course, Koben, and I heard that story, my Zen master, just ignored me. You know, I ask him, and he would just turn away or get distracted or do something else or make excuses why he couldn't talk to me. That's the best thing you could have done at that time. Yes?
What is the benefit of entering into that relationship if what you're going to do is pull the rug out from under you?
No benefit. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it unless you have to. You've heard me say this over and over again. And what does that do? What is that? It's called patience. Don't do anything unless you have to. If you're doing something you don't have to do, you're just kicking up smoke around the situation. Death comes without warning, and it's coming. As Trungpa Rinpoche said, some people will die soon, and some people will die later. Chuckle, chuckle.
My question is pertaining to your statement about none of your business. The clouds are none of my business. My thoughts while meditating are none of my business. Now, here's where I have a problem. My thoughts while meditating seem to be circular. They go and repeat. It's like, let's say there's 7 objects of thought that pertain to my everyday life.
I understand. I've been.
So shouldn't I
wait. Ask me a question. Don't.
The question is, shouldn't my thoughts while meditating be my business?
No,
Why not?
there isn't anyone,
There's no one to make it my business?
kinda. It's close. Just make it as simple as possible. Sit down, hold still, shut up, and see the way you can't quite shut up, and that's what you watch.
Okay.
You sit down, hold everything still. That you, body and mind are not two different things. They sure look like it, but they are not separate from each other.
Okay.
His finger's thinking. Go ahead.
So none of my business is the simplest way to think about it.
That's a good way, because then you can use the metaphor of the clouds. Look in the sky, interesting, magnetizing, good. We've all laid on our back in the grass in an August afternoon or evening and watched the clouds go, and just something magnetizing or soothing about watching things go without any interference.
Okay, good. That answers my.
Yeah. So sit down and treat your thoughts the same way. Interesting, you should watch them, but none of your business from the point of changing the shape or pushing them down. Don't evaluate particularly, don't pick and choose particularly. Or if
Okay.
you do pick and choose spontaneously, then just watch that. So everything is always backing up into, what is that? What is that? Other questions? Joseph?
What is it about not improving that's not the same as not spinning?
So when I say don't improve, I'm saying, not that there won't be some improvement, you know, maybe less warfare, less likely to argue with people as you're working with your own mind, you're being more and more, have more and more the ability to respond or be responsible for your own emotions. You stop blaming others, and you actually kind of stop blaming yourself, and you have some curiosity around the texture and the feeling and quality of those things. There might be, someone else might notice that you're less warlike, someone else might notice that you listen more, but it's not something you're trying to do. So you're just working with your mind as it shows up, and so there may be some things that come along with that corollary kind of function or activities may happen. But the idea of to focus on it as trying to get better and to evaluate it, it keeps you in the same merry-go-round. Getting better, getting worse, getting better. Anything that gets better is going to get worse. Well, don't improve. And if you don't understand, you should ask Joseph's question. Yes.
A question from Elena in New York. If everything and everyone is already awake, then what is the Bodhisattva's role in this?
The Bodhisattva's role, which is about bodhicitta, there's stages of the Bodhisattva's path. The first one being seeing that there's no self, but we're still hooked on everybody else. We still might be doing some blaming, some correcting. But we see that this is empty, there's no one here. So that's the first stage. And then there's, I think, 9 or 10 others. I don't use those particularly. I might use the first one or the last one. The other ones are just variations that people can think about. So the Bodhisattva's role is to, if they've begun to understand this, is to be with all things. That doesn't mean passive, let everything be what it is, but work with the energy as it is, where it is, with as little projecting onto it as possible. So you may find yourself, sometimes the example I use, you begin to, I don't care for this word a lot, but I'm going to use it anyway. You begin to trust the situation. It's situational. You don't have a protocol about how to treat anything. And you don't feel like someone who knows a lot particularly, but you're able to see people and things the way they are and the way they show up. So you might look at one cardboard sign that says, help, hungry, need help. Person holding it. We all see those these days because of our culture. Another person you may see holding a very similar sign, or maybe different or whatever, but you just respond to it as it is, not as you think it is. So you may give one person, you may give them $2, $5, $10, $20, or nothing, or you may take them home and feed them. Hard to say what you would do, but plans in that area are suspicious from the point of view of self-centeredness. Another person you might look at that, and I often say, I'm saying now, if you don't know what to do, don't do anything, because something is showing up there that is unclear. But if you see somebody and you'll know. And another person might look very similar, and you'll know It won't be like, I'm not gonna give them anything, you just won't do it. You won't even come to a conclusion like, I didn't give that to that person because something about that person just, I could kind of see, because I'm kind of psychic, you know, I could kind of see that they were just gonna go out and spend it on drugs. That part is none of your business. What people do with your aid or your help is none of your business. If you're trying to control the person and get them to show up as a, then you're, instead of the self-improvement for yourself, there's already an assumption or pride that I'm so good, I don't have these difficulties, I'm not addicted, I'm doing so great, I think I'll share some of my wisdom with others. This is circular. It might look really good to others, you might show up really good on YouTube, you might show up really like a wonderful holy saint, but death comes without warning. And it will happen to everyone, as far as we know. So, meet everything, or start with the giving everything your attention. Give this your attention. The generosity should go this way first, as it goes this way, not two.
Is there
Yes.
anything, even the most horrendous acts, that does not arise out of Buddha nature?
So as a teaching, you can't separate it, but it's the confusion around it that we think there's something else going on. Something needs to prove, there's a belief in time and space that is practically, can't even penetrate that because it's a relative thing that tries to penetrate it. So therefore it looks substantial, so it's called scientific fact. Scientific fact is just highly polished fiction.
Highly what?
Polished fiction. PF. PF. HPF. Please come and get me. Disagree? I'll fight. Yes.
So, I think you said earlier, are all truths lies?
Yes. Relative truth.
Then how?
Ultimate truth is not, yeah, go ahead.
Then, in this relative world, how do we act with respect and not get sucked into some sort of,
You ready?
yeah.
Stop trying to not get sucked in. Stop trying to improve. Actually notice that. Have some generosity. Have some, you could even say, the fancy word would be humility. Actually allow yourself to be confused. But you're not going to be able to do this and have it work as the Buddhist path unless you're training your mind. I know there are a lot of teachers that say you don't need to meditate. Some of the Advaita masters say all you need to do is just see reality. Well, maybe I'm not disagreeing with that, and go study with them. But I'm saying the way it looks to me is you need to sit down, hold still, and watch the movement of the mind, and notice the way you add. Don't try to stop the adding, because the awareness, if you try to do anything, then the awareness that is showing up as Buddha nature, or the great perfection of the Dzogchen masters. The great perfection means there's nothing to fix. Everything is already okay. Everything is good like it is. Even the fires burning, and even the warfare. It's not okay in what it is. It's a manifestation of suffering and ignorance and confusion that you can't add to by trying to correct. It's not a relative situation. It is a spiritual situation that can be addressed with awareness.
So is all correction just delusion?
Well, I don't want to go, we don't need to go another direction and then box it up so nobody gets to do anything helpful anymore. So, I mean, it's called, that's why Buddhism is called the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. But the add-on thing, I'm helping because, or I'm not helping because, that's the extra bundle of, a load of rotting carrots behind you in your wagon. But just be genuine, be there, no production. Just reception, just receive. Receive. The Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the sound observer, looked down from his Tushita heaven, or whichever one of the heavens he was in. I looked down and saw the earth and saw everybody weeping and saw, and just an image to teach with, and they saw this, and tears came out, and one was white Tara and one was green Tara. Deities, a formation of the wisdom mind that some people in the Tantric tradition or the Buddhist tradition use that as a way of working with the mind, a visualization of it. Not better than something else, just another way of working with it. People who understand this you know, from even before the Buddha, are trying to understand how could we, since a person understands this, what's a good way to help people without interfering with what they need to do with their life. Who is that?
Picture from Ethan.
Oh, looks just like the Buddha. I have one more question, especially from someone who hasn't asked a question. Yes.
This concept of passion, aggression, and ignorance. The passion to me sounds like inspiration, and the aggression sounds like motivation. What's the ignorance? Not observing?
Yeah. Distracting yourself. Something you really need to look at, perhaps, something is talking to you, or there's some kind of something happening here, and because it gets painful or difficult, you to distract yourself into something else, go somewhere else, maybe unconsciously even. And the passion is, there's, you know, we're not saying we shouldn't have passion or really enjoy something, passion for a good movie or music, of course. It's when that starts to get into the service of some kind of self-centered that makes demands on everything. Same thing with aggression, some kind of strong, swift movement in a particular direction, either physically or mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever. There are lots of different levels of that, and it just depends on the particular realm that one is in. So those can function. Those are not wrong. Not something, those actually in the Tibetan tradition especially, those are transmuted into wisdoms. Even anger is transmitted into mirror-like wisdom. So the energy of anger isn't gotten rid of, it's just transmuted. Fancy words for something that's probably pretty simple. Yes?
Why do you say that science is highly polished fiction? Is it because in the awakened mind that it doesn't matter? Or because it has to do with the relative work?
No. The relative and absolute are not two different things. They just look like it. So we have to talk about it that way. When I say body and mind are not two different things. They're just two different ways that this is showing up. So when I say it's highly polished, I'm just saying that it's always, consciousness always finds its own form, including science. So it finds, if there's a form there, then we've stopped. There's formation, and that formation is, well, the simple one we all know about is the flat Earth. The Earth used to be flat, well, now it's round. And then, but we actually think there is an Earth, and we think that it moves. We think there's such a thing as time, because we watch things move in something that we think is stable, which is this, space-time continuum. But as you know, and I'm not a physicist, nowhere near that, obviously. Well, you might have thought I had a secret credential somewhere. But no, I don't, but I do it, I don't teach out of what I can't remember any of this. I can't remember much. So I just teach out of how this looks, and it looks like there isn't anything particular. Doesn't mean it's empty, but there's no solid separate thing anywhere, any person. And so when I say highly polished, it just means that the fallback position is, well, it's scientific. Even the Dalai Lama said, well, Buddhism is this teaching, and science comes along and disproves it. We can change Buddhism to fit science. And I would say yes and no. A little bit, but not too much. Because if you grasp at a conclusion of anything, here's how a conclusion looks. Oh, and now I know what it is. I was such a fool.